How's it going, folks? Welcome back to the channel. Thanks for joining me today. So I'm going to do something a little bit different as requested by one of the commenters. I'm going to do a tier video with all the players currently at Celtic, who they should keep, who they should punt. I'm going to go through all the categories right after the intro. So as you can see, I have my fancy tier maker here, and the categories are: top tier is die to keep, so that is the players I absolutely think should be at Celtic Park next year. The next tier is keep, that's the players I do think Celtic should keep a hold of. The meh is what it says on the tin. I'm not too bothered whether or not they're at Celtic Park next year. Punt means sell them, get rid of them, get them out, they're not good enough for Celtic. And then pay for them to leave, that is the bottom tier. That's the players that I absolutely do not want to see having a Celtic jersey next year. So let's get straight into it then. We'll start with Christopher Ajer, the main man at the back, and he is going straight into the die to keep, because that man would die to win a football match. He's an absolutely Rolls Royce defender. You saw his run setting up one of the goals against Livingston at the weekend. That's what he's capable of doing. He's the best defender in the league. Defensively, he can improve, absolutely, but as a ball playing centre half, there's not too many players better than Christopher Ajer at the minute in the Scottish League, and there's not too many defenders that have come through Parkhead in the last couple of years that have risen to the level of Christopher Ajer. The reason that I would be wary about him staying is that, you know, maybe we're blunting his progression as a professional footballer. So I'm not sure if he'll actually be at Celtic Park next year, but I would die to keep him at the club just because of what the quality of player that he actually is, what he brings to the table. And I think that the new manager should come in, hand him the captain's armband, keep him there for one more year, and then sell him off for more profit, because I do think that maybe with the market, you know, shrinking a little bit, we won't get value for money for Christopher Ajer. So I do think maybe if we held on to him for one more year, I'm not too keen on holding on to players beyond what we should, but if we held on to him for one more year, the market might fix itself a little bit. We might get a little bit more money for Christopher Ajer, because he's only going to keep improving. He's only 23 or 22, so he's still young. He's still really, really valuable to the club. So I do think he should be at the club next year, or I would die to keep him at the club. Next up is Albion Ajeti, and I'm going to put him in the keep folder because Celtic spent a lot of money on him. He's coming in, he hasn't really got his fitness up to scratch for the year, but he hasn't really got a proper turn in the team. I think we counted 3 games in which that he played like a continuous amount of games in a Celtic shirt. So how is he supposed to get his fitness up if he's not? He is a box playing striker, as we said. He's a poacher. He's not a player that's going to be dropping in and linking up play or getting involved in the play when Celtic aren't going for goals, but he is going to be the player who's going to be in the box and getting on to them and scoring, and he can take his chances. So I do think he is good enough to keep at the club. Next up is Barkas, and this one's going to split opinion, but I'm going to stick him right in the keep one because he is a good goalkeeper, whether people like it or not. Some people don't think he's a good enough shot stopper, but we went through and we broke down his play on the Huddle Breakdown, and he is saving the shots that are expected. And again, I want to go into this next season with the caveat that all these players are playing for their jersey, and all these players are playing with the opportunity to actually get back into form, because I don't think they were being coached. They were being left open at the back and completely exposed. So that's the question that I would raise. Is Barkas a bad player, or was this just a shit show of a season, and did he settle in as well as we would have wanted to? I don't think he did, and I do think we should be giving this guy a chance. We spent a lot of money on him again, so these are the players. If we spend money, we gotta give them a chance. And again, if you're playing Scott Bain, what's that doing for your number one goalkeeper, your number one signing this year in terms of confidence? So I do think he should be at the club next year, and we give him an opportunity to stay and fight for his place and show us why we spent so much money on him. Next up is Callum McGregor, and he's going right up to the top tier as well, because I do think Celtic should do absolutely everything in their power to keep Callum McGregor at the club. I personally think he's our best player, our best all-round player, if you're not counting Odds Edouard, who is a sensational talent. But Callum McGregor all round in terms of what he brings to the table, turning up week in, week out, consistency, qualities going forward, qualities defensively. He's a really, really good box-to-box midfielder. And he also brings everything to the table every single week. If there's a player, if you're questioning whether the player's down tools during this season, I don't think Cal McGregor, I don't think that could be thrown at him. I think he gives everything every single week. So I think he goes straight up into the die to keep. And the first player that is probably going into the punt is Connor Hazard. I just don't think he's good enough at this level. He is still young, obviously. He's still got a lot of progression to go through in his career. But from what I've seen, I just don't have confidence that he will grow into a Celtic goalkeeper. I do think he will be a good pro. I do think he will have a good career, but I just don't see it being at a level suitable for Celtic Football Club. I just don't think he's going to be good enough. He flaps at too many things. He's indecisive when crosses come in, especially the fact that Celtic are bad at set pieces. You want a goalkeeper who's good at defending them, and Connor Hazard is not that. He has not proven to me that he can do that. So I would put him in the punt and just sell him on, let him progress in his career. Maybe even sell him out on loan. I don't know what to do, but I just don't think he's good enough to be at Celtic Park next season. Next up is David Turnbull, and he's going into the keep folder. Obviously, I do think he's an excellent player. Obviously, we brought him in, and I do think he's progressing, and he's young, and he's going to be the focal point of that Celtic midfield for a couple of years. I'm not putting him in the die to keep one because, again, off the ball, outside of set pieces, I'm not sure how good he actually is. He's still young. He's still going to improve in those zones. And I do think he will be an excellent player for Celtic going forward, but I'm not dying to keep him. I do think Celtic will keep him. I mean, they're not going to sell him on after a year in the club, and I do think that he will be at Celtic Park next year. It's simple as that. I think he's a good player. I think he's going to be improving over the next couple of years. He's going to be a key player for Celtic over the next couple of years, but he's not in the Cal McGregor, Chris Fryer, die to keep tier just yet. Might be in a couple of years' time. Next up is Odsonne Edouard. Now, before I do this, I want to say that he's gone, So he's gone already. There's no point in talking about it. He hasn't been sold yet, but he's gone. I think we all believe that. I don't think anybody believes Odsonne Edouard is actually going to be at Celtic next season. So I'm going to put him into the punt because there's no point in keeping him. This season was too long. This season was a season too many for Odsonne Edouard. And we saw the dip that we saw with Moussa Dembele, and we're probably going to take the hit that we took with Moussa Dembele in terms of the amount of money that we're going to get for Odsonne Edouard. Absolutely phenomenal player. As I said in a couple of videos before, I think that he is potentially, one of the best players Celtic have ever had in the last, in the SPFL era, the probably from 2004 onwards, Odsonne Edouard is definitely up there with some of the best players that we've ever had, and I think he will have an extraordinary career if he goes to the right club after Celtic. Depending on who that is, I would say it'll probably be back to France like Moussa Dembele did, but I do think he's going to be a phenomenal talent when he does get that big move to whoever it is. Champions League striker at his age, still flying it for France at under 21 level. Absolutely, there's nothing I can say that can sum up the career of Odsonne Edouard at Celtic. Next up is Moi Elyounoussi, and this one is an interesting one because we actually do have a decision to make about Moi Elyounoussi because he's still technically on loan, so we have the opportunity to buy him at the end of the season. Is he good enough to take at the club? And I'm going to put him in the meh tier because he's a bit too inconsistent for my liking. I think he'll be too expensive for Celtic to actually purchase, and I don't think he's worth the money that the club are going to want for him, that Southampton are going to want for him, because I do think if you're looking at Southampton from their point of view, they're going to want 5 to 7, maybe even 8 to 10 million for Moi Elyounoussi, and Celtic don't have that money to do so, and I do think he's too inconsistent to do so. Granted, he is getting goals for Celtic. I think he's Celtic's second top goal scorer this year behind Odsonne Edouard, and we're seeing now with the link-up play with Odsonne Edouard how good that system actually is when you have a competent coach managing you and you have a system and you're told what to do instead of what Elyounoussi was told over the last year or so, in terms of moving him from the 10 position into a striker position into a wing position all over the place and not really having a cohesive role within the team. He has that now. We're seeing what he can do. He's a very good player, but I just don't think that he is going to be cheap enough for Celtic to buy in terms of what he's worth. So I would put him in the meh file. I don't know if he's going to be at Celtic next year, and I don't know particularly if I would go all out to sign him on a hefty enough contract, which is going to be the first youth player that I'm going to go to is Ewan Henderson. And I can't really lie and say that I've seen a whole lot of Ewan Henderson. I've seen a bit of him here and there, and I'm not too sure about him in terms of his qualities. The one issue that I would have with him is that he's essentially an attacking mid. Maybe you can push him out wide as well, and Celtic just have too many of those at the minute. They've got. I remember I did a previous video about the squad talking about it, and Celtic had something like 10 midfielders to 4 strikers and 4 defenders at the club that were permanently there. Ewan Henderson's one of them, so I'm going to put him in the midfield simply because it's not something that he's done. I just haven't seen enough of him to judge whether Celtic should keep him or not. I do if I was to move him anywhere, I'd move him up to the keep file because he's a youngster. He's still going to develop. He hasn't really got first team football in him, and you don't know about these players until they get first team football. And I think that's something that the club really have failed the youth players in the last year and a half, because if you think about that Falkirk game in the Cup, that was the perfect opportunity to play Luke O'Connell, to play Ewan Henderson, but they've sent them out on loan. So what can we do? I just don't understand the logic behind that. How are they supposed to develop to be Celtic players if they're not playing for Celtic, if they're not? And I get the idea of sending them out on loan, but what's the point in sending them out on loan in April? That's my point. Send them out on loan at the start of the season, and if they're doing well, call them back. That's what you do with loanee players. That's what you do with young players. You don't send them out on loan at the end of the season when all is lost, when nothing to play for, and you can actually play them for the first team. So I'm putting Ewan Henderson in the MEF file, and as well as that, I'm putting Greg Taylor in the MEF file as well, because I do think he is a decent enough player. I do think he is a good left back to have on your bench when you're playing against the likes of St. Johnson, when you're playing, I don't want to be unfair to St. Mirren, but those type of teams, mid-table, mid-low side table, or teams in the table, and Greg Taylor should get game time in those games because he has proven that he can do that. But in terms of the Champions League games and Europa League games, Rangers games, those games, the important ones, Greg Taylor just isn't good enough for me at left back, and I do think Celtic need to bring in someone if they're not making Diego Laxalt the permanent signing, and they might be. So Greg Taylor, he goes into the midfield, and the first player to go into the bottom tier, pay for them to leave, is Leigh Griffiths. And I've spoken about him on the podcast during the week. I just don't understand why Leigh Griffiths is still at the club, why he's still on the bench, and he's the prime example of what I would use as bad management in terms of the loanee players. Why is a player like Leigh Griffiths, who's leaving the club at the end of the season, let's be honest, he is leaving the club at the end of the season, why do we have him in the squad and we don't have the young players? It makes no sense to me whatsoever. Leigh Griffiths, yes, he was a really good player at one point in time. He had pace, he had power, he was really good on set pieces, and he's a really good finisher when he gets into the position, but he's just not good enough anymore. His fitness is not good enough, his mentality is not good enough, and I know that he had a lot of personal issues, so I don't want to be too harsh on him, but he's just not good enough for Celtic anymore, and I do think that he'll be leaving the club at the end of the season, and I don't think we should fight him anymore to do that. Next up is James Forrest, and obviously we're seeing the difference with James Forrest in the side. So he is going straight in, if I can get him to drag, he is going straight into the keep file, because I do think we missed him badly this year, and we're seeing the difference in the squad with what he brings to the table. And I'm almost tired of, after the week of talking about him, how good he is and how good he's been playing. He just brings something different to the table. He's a winger, an out-and-out winger who has been playing on the wing for most of his career. He knows what to do. Defensively, he's really strong as well, puts pressure when he's pressing, and he can cut in on his left foot and get a few goals as well. So he's defined himself a little bit. He's matured a lot. I know a lot of people don't like him. His end game is not the best, but I mean, looking down the list of this season, Jeremy Frimpong, end game awful. Diego Laxalt, end game awful. All of our wingers have really bad end game, but James Forrest probably has the best of them. So I think James Forrest is absolutely keep. and I think he'll be a key player for Celtic over the next couple of years because of his experience, and he might slow down a bit. It'll be interesting to see what happens with him in terms of his evolution and whether he changes his game a little bit when his pace slows down, and see how, these wingers generally age a little bit quicker than central players. So it'll be interesting to see what Jamesy Forrest does in terms of his evolution and his game. Next up is Christopher Jullien, and this one is actually tough for me because on paper, Christopher Jullien is absolutely keep 100% every single day of the week. But his injury profile, his age, it's a tough one. I'm going to put him in keep, and I'll tell you why I'm putting him in keep. It's not because he's a great player. It's because of his age profile, and it's because of his injury profile. At 28 years old, he's a very, very good player. He's a solid defender, and we're not going to sell him on for much profit. So what's the point in selling him? That would be why I would be keeping Christopher Jullien. Yes, he probably has high wages, and will he be fit for most of the season? Probably not, but I do think that he is a good enough player at this point in time, and Celtic just aren't going to get value for money if they sell him. So why not keep him for another couple of years, get the best of his years out of him as a player, and then sell him on if you have to sell him on for a small amount of money. But you're going to get a small amount of money for him at this point in time anyway, so why not get another couple of years out of him? And that would be my key point. Patrick Kamala is up next, and he is going into the punt file because he's just not good enough. We've seen little of him. Again, it feels unfair to put him in the punt file, but just the fact that it took him until January until he was fit, according to Neil Lennon, obviously. So it's hard to know what to believe about that. But even the games that he has started, he just hasn't brought enough to the table to me to warrant him a starting place. The couple of games that you're bringing him on for the pace in behind, and you're just looking at him, and he's just not stretching the defence at all, and he's not getting goals. He's not creating chances. I think he created a goal for us in Edouard a couple of weeks ago when he was playing with a little bit of movement. But that was it. That's all I can remember from Patrick Kamala's year at Celtic. And if that's what he's creating, it's just not good enough. And I mean, I've no time for sympathy and empathy when it comes to players who just aren't good enough for this level, because it's a business. He'll find his level, he'll find a club. He won't be just out the gates of Celtic Park and forever never a footballer. He'll find a level, he'll be a professional footballer for probably the remainder of his 20s to early 30s. So just get him out the door, sell him on, bring in a better striker, and just move on with our lives, because I just don't think we should be relying on Patrick Kamala to be the next coming of Odds and Edouard, because that's just not what he is. Next up is Luke O'Connell, and some people might call me biased because I'm sticking him in the keep file because he's Irish, or he's technically Scouse, but he's playing for Ireland. And the reason I do think that we should keep Luke O'Connell, and maybe because Ewan Henderson's in the myth file, might feel unfair to him, but I've actually seen more of Luke O'Connell than I've seen of Ewan Henderson, and I've been really impressed with Luke O'Connell. I think he's a diverse player. He can play in midfield, but he can also move back into the defence as well. And I always like those type of players, those versatile players who have the intelligence to bring up to play in a new position, because that generally shows you a sign of football intelligence, and it generally shows you most players who are intelligent at the age Luke O'Connell is generally go on to be quite good players, because they're adaptable. They know what position to play no matter where you put them. And I've been very impressed with what I've seen with Luke O'Connell in terms of his progression as a youngster, and I do think he is someone that's playing in a position that Celtic are quite light at, in terms of, Scott Brown's out the door, Cal McGregor is going to be there. Then the next player up really that plays that position is Mila Sorrow, and he's more a defensive midfielder. He doesn't really bring that box to box element. And apart from Cal McGregor, Celtic are very light on box to box midfielders, and I do think Luke O'Connell can play that role. I know he plays a little bit more defensively. He's a bit more defensive minded than he is attacking, but he can play the box to box role as well. So I do think he's a player that should be at Celtic Park next year and should get some more opportunity, especially in the cup games, because you need to give first team opportunity to progress, and if he doesn't get that, then he's just not going to progress at Celtic. It's simple as that. Next up is Mikey Johnson, and I'm going to put Mikey into the myth file just because he hasn't played all year. I do like Mikey Johnson as a player, but, again, he's one of these players that's in that weird position that Celtic have of these attacking midfielders that aren't quite wingers. They're sort of inverted forwards, but not really that good in the box. And I think he falls into that category. He played left wing back for a good while there, and he did all right. But with the knee injury, you're just wondering, will he come back as strong as he was beforehand? Will he still have his pace? And I'm willing to give him opportunity. Again, that's why he's in the midfield. I'm not going all out to keep him at the club, but I just don't know if he's going to progress any further to that player. Again, I would have him in the same bracket as Greg Taylor. Probably good to have for the games against St. Johnstone, against the lower level Scottish opposition, and not quite good enough for the Champions League. Not quite good enough for the Europa League. Not quite good enough for those big occasions. I just wouldn't have Mikey Johnson in that bracket. So I think he'd be a good squad player to have, but in terms of a must keep, I definitely don't think he's going to be a player that will star for Celtic over the next couple of years, if that makes sense. Nir Bitton is up next, and I'm going to put him in the punt file because he's gone. Anyway, he's wanted to leave the club for a good while now, and again, I just don't think he's good enough. He doesn't make good enough decisions in the big moments. The Rangers game will be the main reference and what people use to describe the career of Nir Bitton. Good player on the ball, decent enough defensively, but does not have the concentration to go through an entire game without making a mistake. And at this level, at the level Celtic are playing, he's made too many mistakes. Copenhagen springs to mind, and just the big occasion. That's when you think Nir Bitton is just not good enough for that level, and he's not good enough for that level, then he's not good enough to play at Celtic, because that's the level that you want to be measuring yourself against. Whether or not Celtic are in the Champions League, that's where you want Celtic to be measuring. Are they good enough for Europe? And if they're not, get them out of the club. And that would lead me to Anthony Ralston, who I'm going to put him in the punt file because, again, played in Europe, give it the big one. Just don't think he's good enough, and I think his lack of game time, even though he was at the club, really proves that this year. He's just not progressing good enough as a right back. And he's sort of like, he's definitely not at the levels of Matthews from a couple of years ago, because Matthews actually, he played really well for a couple of years for Celtic. Ralston he's just not good enough. I think I don't really know what else to say about Anthony Ralston except for he's just not good enough to play at Celtic anymore. And again, I think he'll find his level. I think he'll drop down. I think he'll play for a decent club in Scotland, but not Celtic. That's the long and the short of it with Anthony Ralston. This one, I think, will divide opinion for everybody, because some people hate him. Some people think, he brings something to the table, and some people think he's a great player. And I'm somewhere in between. I just don't know where I fall on Ryan Christie. I'm going to put him in the midfield because I don't think he's bad enough for me to warrant saying punt him out of the club, because he does bring a lot to the table, and James and Alan on the Huddle Breakdown podcast have brought the stats to back that up. He is a good player. He just needs to stop shooting from 30 yards out, and that just comes with coaching. That comes with a manager who doesn't encourage that type of behaviour. And Ryan Christie brings something to the table. He brings energy into the midfield. He does press the opposition into mistakes, and he does get goals. When Ryan Christie gets the opportunity within a good distance, within a good opportunity, he's a good player to have. If you look at his goal a couple of weeks ago, I can't remember who it was against. It was one of the games that John Kennedy was in charge for, and there was a couple of flicks over the top, and Ryan Christie finished from inside the box. He got a similar goal as well against Livingston, and in those opportunities, when, again, to reference the podcast, the XG is quite high, or the XG is higher than it is 30 yards outside of the box, Ryan Christie's a good player to have. So I do think he'll go in the midfield. He's not good enough for me to say I absolutely keep him at the club, but he's not good enough for me to, or he's not bad enough for me to say that he should be punted out of the club. So let's move on to Scott Bain. And again, this one's a difficult enough one. I'm going to put him in the midfield as well. I think he's a decent enough keeper for a second choice, and when he needs to if Barkas or whoever it is in nets for Celtic when they're injured, he needs to step up into a game. He can do that pretty seamlessly. I'd say, you know what, I'm going to move him up to the keep. I don't think he's good enough to be our first choice goalkeeper, but I think he's a decent enough second choice goalkeeper to have. And the fact that he got the trust of the management this year, he stepped up when he was needed. He wasn't, pulling up trees like Fraser Forster or anything like that. But I do think he's a good second choice goalkeeper to have at the club. And that might divide, but I'm still not, he's going down to the meh. He's not good enough to be in the keep file. He's back in the meh. Scott Bain's in the meh. Sorry, I probably should have made the decision about these before I actually came on and started doing this video, but I just don't think he's not good enough to be the first keeper, but he is good enough to be the second keeper. You know what I mean? Scott Brown is up next, captain. He's gone out of the club, so I'm not going to pay the club to sell him, but he's gone anyway. Absolute legend of the club, won countless trophies, captain. Really, just what can you say about Scott Brown? I did a video about him. He's absolutely phenomenal for Celtic over the last couple of years, and whether people want to throw the if he was good enough he would have left card at him, that's fair enough, that's their decision. But you know what, Scott Brown has played year in year out for Celtic in the Champions League and the Europa League, and has won how many Scottish Cups, how many Scottish Leagues. You don't do that. You don't be a starter for Brendan Rodgers. You don't be a starter in Europe if you don't have something about you. So Scott Brown, he's leaving the club, so he's in the punt file. Ismail Assoro is probably the man who was, brought in as a contingency plan for Scott Brown leaving. And he is going into the keep file because he's good enough to be in the keep file. I do think he will develop as a player. He's still young as well. Will he develop into the player that we think he is? I don't think so. I think one of the key factors I will say about this season, and it's an interesting sort of nugget for Celtic to think about for this season, is that the rays of light, the good players this season, the players that we, sort of latched onto, are they as good as we think they are, or are we just so bad this season that we latch onto those good players? So, David Turnbull, he's clearly a good talent, but just the way that people are talking about him, is he that exceptional talent? I'm not sure if he is. He's just better than what we had. Same with Ismail Assoro. He's a good player, no doubt about it. He does a good job, but is he going to be good enough to be a regular starter in a Celtic team that's fighting for a title, that's fighting for Europe, that's playing in Europe? I'm not sure if he will develop to be that good, but I do think he will be good enough to be at the club. And if we don't bring in anybody better, I think he will do a job. Right, we're getting to the end of this. Stephen Welsh is up next. This is a tough one as well, because again, I do think Stephen Welsh will develop into a decent player, but a great player, I'm not so sure. I'm going to put him in the meh file as well. And I do think he's done well for a young lad coming up, and it's nice to see young lads getting opportunities. And Celtic probably should keep him in order to develop him and see what he does next season, and see if he kicks on, see if he develops on the skills. But where he's lacking is definitely aerially, which is an issue that Celtic have in defence. So he needs to progress there. He's not the quickest. He's not the best on the ball. Defensively, his positioning is quite good. He does have some real potential there, but will he develop into a Celtic centre half? That's the question. So that's why he's in the meh file. I'm not out to keep him at the club, but I do think he is a decent enough talent to give a chance. And the final player is an interesting one, that it happens to be my favourite player. And Tom Rogic is just absolute magic when he's at his best, but he's absolutely terrible when he's at his worst. And that's why I'm putting him into the punt file. And it hurts me to put him into the punt file. I just, he's a magician. He doesn't have that nickname for no reason. He's an absolute magician when he can do it. And the Scottish Cup, for example, that's when Tom Rogic's at his best. But off the ball, he provides nothing. Defensively, he provides even less. And I just don't think he does it consistently enough to be the player who Celtic want him to be. And at this stage, he wants to leave. He wanted to leave last season. Celtic held on to him. you're not getting much money for Tom Rogic in the market these days. So I do think he should leave the club and be sold by the club, and let him leave and enjoy the moments that we got from Tom Rogic, because he's just that little touch of class that Celtic have been missing recently enough. Just that doesn't. It's these players that frustrate you because they don't do it. They don't do it enough, but when they do it, by God, they're absolutely exceptional, and that's where Tom Rogic falls. I love him as a player, but he's just not consistent enough to be at Celtic until the end of the season. So that is the final tier list of who I think Celtic should keep and who I think Celtic should punt. So in the die to keep, there's only 2, which is worrying enough, because that means there's not too many players there that I would absolutely go all out on in terms of his quality. Christopher Ayer and Callum McGregor, the 2 players in the die to keep. The keep players, I do think Albion Ajeti, again, think he'll improve. Barkas might split opinion, but I do think, again, give him an opportunity in the first team regularly enough to see if he improves. David Turnbull, James Forrest in the midfield, absolutely should keep. Christopher Julian, as I explained, I would keep him because I don't think there's much point in selling him because you're not getting value for money. Luke O'Connell, I think, will develop into a really good midfielder, and Ismail Asaro, still out on him whether or not he will be that proper centre defensive midfielder that we need, but I do think he's good enough to keep for next season. In the midfield is Elyounoussi. Again, like I said, he will be too expensive to buy, and I don't think he's worth the money that he's going to be. Southampton are going to look for him. Ewan Henderson and Greg Taylor, again, not sure about the 2 of them. Not sure if they're good enough. Ewan Henderson, I haven't seen enough of, so that's why he's in the midfield. Greg Taylor, good, second choice left back. But is he good enough to be the first choice? I don't think so. Mikey Johnson, sort of similar to Greg Taylor there. Ryan Christie, again, like I said, if he stops shooting from 40 yards out, he'll move instantly up to the keep file. But apart from that, he's just not good enough to be in the absolutely keep. Scott Bain moved up and down from the meh into the keep and back into the meh. He's good choice center or second choice goalkeeper, but is he good enough to be the first choice? Don't know going forward if he's good enough for the top level. Same with Stephen Welsh at centre back. And then in the punt, you've got Connor Hazard, because I just don't think he's developing quick enough. I don't think he's going to be good enough. Austin Edouard, because he's gone anyway. Patrick Klimala, because I just don't think he's going to develop into the player that we want him to be. Nir Beaton wanted to leave. He can leave when he wants to. Anthony Ralston, again, just don't think he's developing quick enough. Don't think he's good enough. Scott Brown already left the club, or he's leaving at the end of the season. Farewell to him. He's going to be brilliant. Tom Rogic, as I said, my favourite Celtic player over the last couple of years, but he's just not doing it consistently enough for the club. Pay them to leave is, it seems so unfair to have Leigh Griffiths in there, but he just frustrates the balls off me. So he is absolutely gone from the club at the end of the season, in my opinion. That is the keep or punt list, the tier maker. If you do like this video and you want to see more of these, maybe you want to see more tier videos, let me know in the comments below. Just leave a comment below. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't subscribed already. Thanks for watching, folks, and we'll chat to you later.